Hey everyone. Welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host, Ruby, and today we're going to be reading more of Chicken Soup for the Dog Lover's Soul. Stories of canine companionship, comedy, and courage. Written by multiple authors such as Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Marty Becker, DVM, Carol Klein, Amy D. Shoja, and many more. But before we begin, I would like to say thank you for being patient with me. I have been going through some health issues, unfortunately, but I'm trying to look at the positive and just keep pushing forward, you know? That's all we can really do is just keep pushing forward no matter what life throws at us. And of course, if you guys have any questions or concerns, just comment down below and I'd be happy to answer them. And or go to my Instagram, Strange Minds 6, and I would love to answer some of the questions there. If you want to ask any questions or DM me any questions, I don't mind either. But how about we begin on this book, and then possibly next video where we might be reading a different book. It's called An Outbreak of Witchcraft. That's a graphic novel, but I know you guys won't be able to see the graphics. And then there's another book called The Ghost Keeper. There's another that is called A Spark Within the Forge and A Thief Among the Trees. So definitely comment below which one you would like to hear. I'll even put a poll up, as a matter of fact, to see which one you guys would like me to read, and we can go from there. But without further ado, my dear friends, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't already, it'd mean a great deal to me if you did. And without further ado, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax. And let's get to it. Calvin, a dog with a big heart. Blinded in a Nazi concentration camp, at the age of 21, I arrived in America with my wife in 1951. We worked and raised 2 sons. Now, at 82, I have 5 grandchildren. For most of those years, I depended on a white cane as my mobility aid. I envied my blind friends who had guide dogs. They had so much more freedom of mobility than I did. My problem, although I was reluctant to admit it, was that I had a fear of getting too close to dogs. In spite of my fear, the day I retired, I decided to apply for a guide dog at the Guiding Eyes for the Blind Guide Dog School. I was wanting the freedom a dog could give me. I had to make the attempt. When I arrived, Charlie, the training supervisor, had a few cheerful, welcoming words for the 12 of us, beginning the May 1990 class. After the welcoming ceremonies, I took Charlie aside and said, I would like to have a guide dog, but because of my negative experiences with dogs, I'm not sure I could ever bond with one. Charlie, Curious, asked me if I minded telling him about my negative experiences. I'm a Holocaust survivor. In one of the concentration camps I was in, I explained, the commandant had a big, vicious German shepherd. Sometimes, when he entertained guests and wanted to show how cruel he could be, or how vicious his dog was, or both, he told a guard to bring a group of prisoners into his courtyard. Once before I was blinded, and I was part of that group. I watched as he chose one of us to stand apart. Then he gave the dog the command, "Fass," meaning fetch. With one leap, the dog grabbed the victim by the throat. In a few minutes, that man was dead. The dog returned to his master for his praise and reward, and the audience applauded the dog for a job well done. More than 4 decades later, nightmares about this still torment me. I confided to Charlie. After a moment of reflection, Charlie said, "No human being is born evil. Some become evil. No dog is born vicious. Some are trained to be vicious. Give us a chance to prove to you that the dogs we train and the one you get will guide you safely, love you, and protect you." His words strengthened my resolve. I was determined, I told Charlie, to give myself a chance. Should I fail, it wouldn't be for lack of trying. Charlie called a meeting of his staff to re-examine my file and decided Calvin would be the right match for me. Calvin was a 2-year-old, 80-pound chocolate lab. Following our 4-week training period, I went home with Calvin and found myself struggling to forge a bond with him. I was in the process of learning to love him, and although I understood the helpful role Calvin was to play in my life, I was still cautious around him, never fully relaxing and accepting him. This struggle affected Calvin as well. During this period, Calvin ate but lost weight, and the vet told me it was because the dog could sense my emotional distance. I often recalled Charlie's words, "No human being is born evil, and no dog is born vicious." My instructor called me several times, offering advice and giving me encouragement. Slowly but surely, Calvin and I began to break down the invisible barrier between us. Finally, about 6 months, twice as long as the average human guide dog team, I began to trust Calvin fully. I went with him anywhere I needed to go, and did so with confidence. Any lingering doubts I had about Calvin were dispelled. One day, as we stood at a busy intersection, waiting to cross the street, as we had been trained, when I heard parallel traffic start to move, I waited 3 seconds, then gave the command, "Calvin, forward." When we stepped off the curb, a motorcyclist suddenly and unexpectedly made a sharp right turn directly in front of us. Calvin stopped on a dime, slamming on the brakes. He had reacted exactly as he had been trained to react in such a situation. Oh, sorry everyone. Realizing that he had saved us both from serious injury, I stepped back onto the sidewalk, crouched down, and gave Calvin a hug around the neck, and praised him for a job well done. It was the turning point in our life together. After that, the love between us flowed freely and Calvin blossomed. Out of harness, Calvin became as playful and mischievous as any other dog. When my granddaughter Hannah, a 1 year old, just started just starting to get ready and steady on her feet, came to visit, Calvin let her painstakingly position herself to grab his silky ear. Then he moved deftly to the side, his tail wagging a mile a minute as Hannah reached in vain for him. Calvin's game made Hannah squeal with delight. Calvin also formed a loving relationship with my wife, Barbara. She was coping with several chronic physical conditions and was homebound, and they became inseparable pals and playmates. At her periodic visits to the doctor, he noticed that her blood pressure was lower than it had been for a long time. Barbara asked the doctor if Calvin's companionship could have anything to do with it. Most unlikely, he replied. I'll change your prescription, though, since your blood pressure is better. Come back in 2 months. The blood pressure stayed down. The doctor, although unconvinced, grudgingly accepted that Calvin's companionship might have a favorable effect. Barbara and I had no doubt. The fact spoke for themselves. Time and time again, Calvin proved he had a big heart, big enough for Barbara and me. He not only gave me the extra measure of independent and safe travel I had craved for many years, he also became a beloved member of the family. Yes, Charlie, you were right. Give us a chance, you said. Your dog will love you, guide you, protect you. Calvin did all that and then some. Written by Max Edelman. Fate, Courage, and a Dog Named Tess. A quote written by D. Eisenhower. What counts is not necessarily the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. I had just picked up my young niece Hannah from school when I first saw the confused dog darting in and out of traffic at a busy intersection. She was a lanky German shepherd, and I cringed as I watched several cars swerve or stop to avoid hitting her. She appeared to be lost, and Hannah immediately began begging me to intervene. I resisted. I was in a hurry to get home to cook dinner for Hannah and her parents and brother. I had a schedule to maintain, and right then helping a stray dog was the last thing I wanted to do. However, as soon as I was able to, I turned around. As we approached the intersection, from the opposite direction, we saw her again. She had moved out of the street and was walking, now making friendly advances to everyone that was walking by, only to be ignored or shooed away by people in a hurry to get home at the end of their workday. With a hopeless sigh, I pulled over and parked my car. Okay, Hannah, I said. This is what we'll do. I'll open the car door, give her one chance to get in, but if she doesn't, we're going home. I won't try to force her. I got out, opened the door, and made a half-hearted call to a pup more than 50 feet away. At the sound of my voice, she pricked her ears, looked directly at me, and came running in our direction. In an instant, she was in the car, wagging her tail and showering us with doggy kisses as if she'd known us forever. I couldn't help but laugh. What a sweet dog. And miracle of miracles, she was wearing a chain collar that I hadn't noticed before. Even though she didn't have a name tag, surely someone was missing her. A phone call or two, and with any luck, I'd be able to return her to her family. This might not be so bad after all. I took her home, firmly believing she would soon be out of my life. A week later, after running ads in the paper and making repeated phone calls to the local Humane Society and Rabies Control, I finally resigned myself to the hard reality that whoever had placed the collar around her neck didn't want her back. I lived in a small house and already had 2 dogs, so keeping her wasn't an option. I decided I would find her a home where she would be cared for and appreciated by a loving family. My first step was to make an appointment with my vet, who pronounced her in perfect health. Although obviously underweight, I named her Tess and began to teach her about in-house living, knowing she needed some better manners to increase her appeal. With lots of food and grooming, she filled out and her scruffy coat began to glisten. She thrived under all the attention. Within 6 weeks, she was completely housebroken and beautiful. I wrote a story about her and convinced the editor of our local paper to run it in the weekend edition. The story was typed and ready to be dropped off at the newspaper office the next day, and I felt certain we were spending one of our last evenings together. Just as I was getting ready for bed, the doorbell rang. And because it was late, I answered wearing my pajama, thinking it was probably a neighbor wanting to borrow something. Instead, much to my dismay, an unkempt man stood before me asking to use my phone. No way I wanted this guy in my house, but I offered to make a call for him if he would supply the number. Without another word, he opened the storm door and pushed his way into my living room. My mind raced. Why in God's name hadn't I checked to see who it was before opening the door? My 2 dogs, an English Springer Spaniel and a Shih Tzu, and Tess all stopped their effusion greetings, sensing as I did that this guy was trouble. The 3 of them looked at him, then looked at me for some sign that things were okay. But things were definitely not okay. I was too terrified to speak. I stood frozen, trapped in a dangerous situation from which I feared there was no escape. Suddenly, the German shepherd I had taken in to save from a life on the streets stepped between me and this stranger who threateningly stood before us. Tess was only 8 or 9 months old, big, but still very much a pup, and yet there she was, head down, hackles raised, emitting a low-pitched, menacing growl as she glared at the intruder. For maybe 5 long seconds we all stood there, motionless. Then very slowly the man took one backward step. He raised his hand slightly as he implored me to hold my dog, and he carefully backed out of my house and down the walk. At last, finally able to move, I shut the door, locked it, and turned to hug my friend. The stray dog I had rescued and who now had rescued me. Magically, with the danger gone, she had transformed herself back into the wiggling, tail-wagging, pain-in-the-neck pup I had come to know. The next morning I called and canceled the appointment. I had to drop off the story about her. Tess didn't need a home. She already had one. 2 dogs had become 3, but the lack of space didn't seem nearly as important as it had before. Since that night, Tess has never once growled or shown the least bit of hostility to any other human being, and although her muzzle is now graying, she still often acts like the pup who without hesitation, bounded into my car and my life 11 years ago. I have learned a lot from Tess, especially on that memorable night when she taught me about fate and courage. But most important, she showed me how a random act of kindness can bring blessings to your life. Susan Fogel. And that is where we are going to leave it, my dear friends. Tune in next video. Well, actually, I'm going to put a poll. I'm going to put a poll and see what you guys want me to start reading. If you guys want me to continue this book, then I will. I'll just do it by parts. And then I'll do other videos that have the books within them. An Outbreak of Witchcraft, The Ghost Keeper, A Spark Within the Forge, and A Thief Among the Trees. So just let me know. Again, I'll put the poll up and definitely let you guys decide. And as always, this has been Ruby, signing off, my dear friends.